Welcome back to On the Mind. I'm Austin,
I am Duncan.
and today we're going to be talking about independence. No, we're not talking about hundreds of years ago, we're talking about today. So, most of you may not know about these two regions, but if you do, you'll understand why it's so influential and why we decided to talk about it. So, without further ado, our local Duncan is going to talk to you about Catalonia.
Okay, so for those of you who are unaware, Catalonia is the most economically productive region of Spain. It produces a disproportionate amount of Spain's overall GDP, is the fastest growing region of Spain, and, most importantly, is historically, ethnically, and linguistically separate from the remainder of Spain, which is kind of a cobbled together country, not unlike Italy, out of regions that were former independent kingdoms. Now, in the case of the Catalans, there's been a Catalan independence movement for quite some time, but up to now it hasn't really gained a whole lot of steam. That changed drastically when the Catalonian government, citing as its reason taxation, in other words, disproportionate levels of taxation being levied against the whole of Spain, but being used specifically to redistribute wealth from Catalonia into less productive regions of Spain, decided to hold an independence vote on October the 1st. Now, this is a fascinating independence vote because it's structured completely unlike any other modern independence vote that we have seen. So I'll use as an example Brexit. In the case of Brexit, the entanglements that had been created between the remainder of the European Union and Great Britain were set to be unraveled over a very long period of time, beginning with the invocation of Article 50, which in and of itself was delayed substantially. In the case of the Catalonian vote, the bill that has actually been presented requires the Catalonian government to declare independence in the event of a yes vote within 48 hours of the vote taking place. Now, the Spanish government has said that this vote is not only unconstitutional, it is fundamentally illegal. They have gone to some pretty extreme lengths, up to and including, as I have heard, raiding printing shops trying to find where the paper ballots, apparently the Catalans plan to use paper ballots for this particular vote, where these ballots are being printed in an effort to seize them. It is also said that it will under no circumstances recognize the outcome of the vote.
Duncan, did you just say they're going to try to seize the means of production?
They're not trying to seize the means of production, they are trying to seize the output.
I see. Okay. Well, I just had to check there. We all know what that means. But this would be a pretty big blow to Spain.
Considerable, in fact. Spain was hit very hard by the 2008 financial crisis. It suffered from massive unemployment afterwards. Its economy has recovered fairly well, but it's still a little bit shaky. The exit of Catalonia, especially if it were to trigger some sort of a general internal conflict, could very well crash Spain's economy. And thanks to the wonderful common thread that is the euro throughout Europe, could actually result in a European economic crisis at large.
Do you think that Catalonia would be a part of the European Union?
It's very difficult to say. Again, this 48-hour timeline that they have presented for declaring independence makes it very difficult to say what would happen after that point, especially considering that the very first thing they'd have on their hands, in the event that this vote goes to the affirmative, is a very large legal and potentially military battle with Spain itself. It's very unclear as of yet. So far, the Spanish have hoped to just stop the vote, which frankly has probably generated more ill will than it has goodwill among the Catalonian population.
Fair enough.
It's very hard to say exactly what will happen in the 24 hours following that vote if it is in the affirmative.
Speaking of means of production, how would the army look on the side of the Catalonians if it did become a military conflict? Would it
They do not have their own independent military.
Right.
Now,
what's the chances that part of the military would defect to their side is what I guess I'm asking.
that is really getting into speculation that I don't have a whole lot of good data to back up. I don't want to speculate too much into it. My personal assumption on this is that I have a very hard time seeing this actually turning into an at-large military conflict. I think you might have some things like small military groups securing government buildings in Catalonia. I could certainly see that. I could certainly see if there are Spanish military bases in Catalonia, and I'm sure there are, although I couldn't name any individually off the top of my head for you. I could see those going on lockdown pending whatever decision was going to come from Madrid. but I have a very hard time envisioning this turning into something akin to the American Civil War, just because of the amount of difficulty that would cause Spain on the world stage at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just interesting to see that these sort of movements are still happening.
Right, and actually, we've seen a lot of this in the last few years. Scotland came very close to seceding from the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, in turn, seceded from the European Union. Mm-hmm. Catalonia could potentially secede from Spain. In America, even though these movements aren't really given a whole lot of credence in the popular mind, California got close.
And Texas, yes.
Yeah. The Texans are a little bit more serious about it than the Californians, although, frankly, in California, you can really see the argument for it because, one, California is politically very different from the remainder of the United States, and they contribute disproportionately in taxes. Most of their taxes are redistributed to poorer states.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of funny when you think about it. But anyway, because that's what they believe in, but they want to secede because of it.
Right, or at least some Californians do.
Right. It's just funny to see that.
It absolutely is.
But anyway, moving on, let's talk about the Kurds. This is something that we've talked about before, the implications, how unhappy Turkey would be. Let's just talk about why it's such a complicated situation and why it might actually be a good thing if it happens.
Right. Now, Kurdistan is a region that spans parts of Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and Iran. The Kurds are a historic ethnic group that is very different from the remainder of the groups that are in the region. One of the most defining characteristics about the Kurdish people is that they just do not seem to have, on any level, been influenced as much by either Baathism, the secular political philosophy that came to power in both Syria and Iraq in the 1970s, 1980s under Hafez Assad and Saddam Hussein, respectively, or the ideas of extremist political Islamism. They have not, for example, been particularly enamored with Daesh. In fact, they've spent much of the last several years killing them, which I would argue is a laudable goal in and of itself.
And the strange part is that they've been helping the U.S. in Iraq.
Correct.
And Russia in Syria.
That is entirely
And while you might hear that last part and think, well, wait, doesn't that mean they're fighting us? No, their whole goal is literally to kill Daesh.
Right, because Daesh actually attempted to annex Kurdistan, and the Kurds effectively live by one very, very hard and fast rule, which is that they want Kurdish autonomy. Now, this has caused a lot of friction in different places in the past. Saddam Hussein had to deal with Kurdish insurrection in Iraq. In the post-war years after the Iraqi invasion, actually even after the first Gulf War, the Kurds gained large autonomy, and then after the United States invaded, they gained even greater autonomy, effectively becoming their own country. However, the only reason that they have not, up to this point, declared an independent Kurdish state is that Turkey has a long-standing threat thanks to conflict between a group known as the PKK and the Turkish government, that if the Kurds ever do declare independence, Turkey will invade the very same day.
However, we were talking before the show, and it's kind of understood that since the U.S. and Russia has both benefited from them, it'd be hard for us to see that they don't get away with this independence vote.
That is correct. And this is one of those areas where Turkey is at odds with NATO. We kind of have to remember that Turkey is actually one of the states that, despite being in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, does not necessarily always act in accordance with that organization's best interests. I mean, I'm sure some of our listeners will remember several months ago.
We were talking about when Trump launched the missile at Syria, and the plane was shot down.
Right, I was going to say the Russian and Turkish pilot who got into a bit of a dogfight over the Turkish-Syrian border.
Mm-hmm. And they both claimed it was on either side of the border.
Correct. When in reality, I mean, it was so close that even advanced radar systems really couldn't tell exactly where the plane was.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just Turkey is going to have a hard time finding out how to play this one out. It's like you said before the podcast, it's likely they're going to see Russia backing them and say, is it worth that fight?
Right, because very likely, sort of the trade-off for the support that Russia has gotten from the Kurds in fighting Daesh in Syria, which they've been an immensely competent force. The Peshmerga, which is one of their military groups, has been extremely effective in fighting both in their territory and outside of it. My guess is that there is some implicit agreement that Russia would at least help to back Kurdish independence after the war. They're going to get something out of it no matter what, because the Assad government in Syria is so badly broken that they have de facto autonomy already within Syria. My guess is they would like to hang on to that.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I'd assume that Assad is a practical person at this point and says, hey, I don't really need another enemy, especially not one that's very effective at killing people.
Right.
That don't want to be killed in our region.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So my guess is that in Syria they're going to have conventional autonomy for quite some time to come. There aren't that many Kurds in Iran. There are some, not a whole lot.
They might just make the trip over, honestly.
Sure. The Turkish Kurds are a little bit of a different problem, because even as recently as last year, under the guise of attacking Daesh or retaliating for attacks that Daesh had pulled off in Turkey, the Turkish government was actually bombing Turkish Kurdistan.
Which is kind of bullshit when you think about it, but
it absolutely is. But the Turks have a complete blind spot. When it comes to the Kurds, they just get tunnel vision.
Yeah, they don't care. Which, it's almost genocide, if you think about it, at least in their own territory.
Right.
Within the confines of their territory, they're almost saying, hey, let's do it.
Right. Admittedly, they have never taken that next logical step to actively eliminating the Kurdish population, which, I mean, certainly is a good thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, in terms of whether or not the Kurdish people there are severely politically oppressed and whether or not they are willing constituents within that country is a very different matter altogether.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming weeks. I think that you're going to see this in the news, possibly.
Certainly, if the Catalonians vote to secede,
right? Not only that, but anything Russia-related seems to get topped off the charts, and if they're related to the Kurds, then it's suddenly going to be, hey, the Kurds helped keep Hillary Clinton from being elected president. But anyway.
I'm sure that Hillary Clinton will be more than happy to blame the Kurds.
Yeah, it'll be in her next book. You'll see it.
Yeah, the Kurds cost me the election.
I guess I should ask, since we're running below time for a change, which is just outstanding, by the way, what's the implications with the U.S. here, other than us being in the global economy?
Well, I was going to say...
For Catalonia and Kurdistan.
Right. I was going to say, when it comes to Catalonia, mostly economic, a euro crisis would have substantial impacts throughout the entire world. And that goes very much according to how the secession would actually be structured. If they do just back out in 48 hours and say, you know, Catalonia is no longer part of Spain, there really could be a euro crisis, and a very sudden one. Now, how much that would affect us would depend on a variety of factors, depending on how the response worked, how robust the euro is at this point, which is something that economists are a little bit in disagreement on. Some think that it's more robust, a little bit stronger than it really probably is. Some people think it's a little bit weaker, but it's certainly not an unshakable currency in the global forex market at this point. So that would have more of an effect on our trade, on our debt holdings with Europe. So yeah, there are implications for us there, but they're probably not enormous unless a global recession is triggered by the worst possible set of circumstances. Now, when it comes to Kurdistan, it gets a little bit more complicated. Ostensibly, the U.S. supports the Kurds. With that said, we're also in NATO with Turkey, which puts us in a little bit of a weird position. Officially, we're supposed to back the Turkish position, but again, we have backed the Kurds substantially. We've largely been in favor of Kurdish autonomy. We've just never taken that next step and been in favor of Kurdish independence. This would be a weird situation even with a very stable, very predictable president in the White House. With Donald Trump, I'm not even going to actually make a guess as to whose side he'd fall on. It's anyone's guess. Now, this does have implications for us depending on how it goes. If Turkey invades Kurdistan, we get yet another war in an unstable region that, unfortunately, like it or not, the United States is going to have a role in. If, on the other hand, we get a stable Kurdish state out of this, we have a great buffer state between Syria and Iraq that can actually act as a stabilizing force within the region. And I think that would actually be one of the best possible outcomes we could possibly see out of all of this.
You know what? I'm actually going to take that as a closing statement from you.
It was.
And I have to say that largely I can't find it a hole in your argument. I think that it's going to be interesting. Especially Catalonia's vote, mostly because I think California and Texas are going to be watching it.
Yeah, for sure.
With hawkish eyes. As far as Kurdistan goes, I honestly think even Trump would like to see a victory here in foreign policy. If he didn't back this, he would be the worst foreign policy president we've ever had, including Barack Obama on that list.
I have to agree with that.
Now, if he does back the Kurds, he might even be put recently in the top 5.
Yeah.
Out of the top 5.
I mean, that would certainly put him above Barack Obama and George W. Bush.
Yeah, at least in the first term. But let's just move on to the fact that this would give him an easy win.
It would. The question is, does he recognize what constitutes a win in foreign policy? Does he actually understand the situation well enough to understand why that's a win?
Well, if it doesn't include his name, probably not.
The good news is Mattis understands this.
Oh, yeah.
I
I'm
have
sure
absolute and ironclad faith that Jim Mattis
he knows which dog to bet on, yeah. Anyway, that's all that's on the mind from us. If you missed Bryce, leave that in the comments. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you.
We'll tell him that you love him.
If you like the format, just let us know. If you have any topic suggestions, let us know. If you, for whatever reason, really liked this video, please feel free to share it. Anyway, if you want to hear more from us, or Duncan's lovely explanations, and my occasional question, just subscribe. But for all intents and purposes, that's all that's on the mind. I'm Austin.
I'm Duncan.
Good night.
Good evening.